It started like any other day, with the usual hum of the city in the background. The young photographer had been wandering through the streets for hours, camera in hand, looking for small moments that usually went unnoticed. People hurrying along, children laughing, street vendors shouting their prices, all of it was just background noise most of the time. But to the photographer, every small detail was a story waiting to be told. Every face had a secret, every shadow had a hidden message, and every fleeting moment could become something magical if captured the right way. That morning had begun like any other. The photographer had woken up in a small apartment, the kind that was just enough to fit a bed, a small kitchen, and a corner for the computer and camera equipment. It wasn't luxurious, but it was home. While most people would have been frustrated by the modest surroundings, the photographer saw it differently. It was a space full of memories, a place where ideas were born, and where quiet mornings could turn into inspiration for hours after breakfast, which was usually just toast and a cup of coffee. The photographer decided to check the mailbox. There were usually bills, letters, or sometimes nothing at all. But that day, there was something different. A thick envelope without a return address sat at the bottom of the stack. It looked important, and somehow it felt different from the usual pile of mundane mail. The photographer's heart raced a little, curiosity bubbling up. Carefully, the envelope was opened, and inside was a beautifully designed invitation, printed on thick, elegant paper. It wasn't the kind of invitation you could ignore. The text was simple but striking. It invited the photographer to an exclusive gallery opening, promising a night of art, inspiration, and networking. The location was somewhere in the heart of the city, in a building that sounded grand and unfamiliar. There were no names attached, no hint of who had sent it, or why they were specifically invited. Just a quiet encouragement to come and see something special. At first, the photographer hesitated. Invitations like these didn't come every day, and sometimes they were mistakes, meant for someone else, or worse, scams. The photographer thought about ignoring it and continuing with the usual routine, walking the streets, capturing moments, and hoping someday someone would notice the work. But something about the envelope, the weight of it in the hands, the careful design, made it hard to put aside. It felt like more than just paper. It felt like an opportunity knocking softly, quietly, in a way that demanded attention. After pacing the apartment for a few minutes, debating whether to go, the photographer finally decided to take a chance. If nothing else, it would be an experience. There was no harm in showing up, meeting new people, and seeing what the evening had to offer. And who knew? Maybe it would be just another night in the city. But maybe, just maybe, it would be more. That evening, dressed simply but neatly, the photographer arrived at the gallery. From the outside, it was impressive. Tall glass doors reflected the city lights, and inside, the soft hum of conversation floated out to the street. The photographer stepped inside, feeling slightly out of place among people who clearly knew each other, wearing suits and dresses that spoke of wealth and confidence. The smell of fresh paint, polished wood, and expensive perfume filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of freshly cut flowers placed carefully in corners. As the photographer moved further inside, the gallery revealed itself. Walls were lined with artwork, each piece framed with care, each telling its own story. People wandered the space in small groups, talking quietly, sipping champagne, and occasionally stopping in front of a painting to examine it closely. The photographer wandered too, trying to blend in while secretly feeling nervous. Every few steps, there was another glance at the walls, another hope to spot something familiar, or at least something that spoke to them. Then it happened. The photographer's eyes landed on a photograph that seemed impossibly familiar. It was displayed prominently on the main wall, larger than most of the other pieces, framed elegantly, and positioned as if it were the centerpiece of the entire exhibition. For a moment, the photographer froze. The image was instantly recognizable. It was one of their own, a photo taken months earlier on a rainy afternoon. The memory of that day came rushing back, the way the light had hit the street, the way a passerby's expression had captured a fleeting moment of joy, the way everything had aligned perfectly for just one shot. The photographer stepped closer, heart pounding, eyes widening. There it was, hanging in a gallery they had only just entered, in a space they could never have imagined their work reaching. They whispered softly, almost to themselves, "Why is my picture here?" The words felt strange, almost impossible, like a question that had no logical answer. How could someone have discovered it? How could it have ended up here on this wall in front of so many people? Before the photographer could get lost in thoughts, a man approached. Tall, confident, with an air of calm authority, he smiled warmly. "I see you found it," he said, nodding toward the photograph. There was something in his voice that made the photographer look up, meeting eyes that held genuine appreciation. "It's yours?" he asked, as though the answer was obvious. The photographer nodded, still trying to find words. "Yes, but how?" The question hung in the air, a mixture of disbelief, curiosity, and excitement. The man chuckled lightly. "I suppose that's fair. I've been following your work online. When I saw this photograph, it spoke to me in a way I can't really explain. I had to have it. And then I thought, why not share it with others who might feel the same way?" The photographer's mind raced. They had taken the photo, posted it online, maybe shared it on social media, but never imagined it would travel beyond a few likes and comments. And here it was, displayed in a high-profile gallery, admired by strangers, a centerpiece for an exclusive event. The shock was immense, almost overwhelming, but at the same time, there was a warmth growing in their chest. Someone had noticed. Someone had truly seen the work. Not just as an image, but as a story, a moment. A piece of art worth sharing. As the photographer stood there, taking it all in, they realized that this night would be remembered forever. The city outside continued to move at its usual frantic pace, but inside the gallery, time seemed to slow. Every sound, the soft chatter of the crowd, the faint clinking of glasses, the quiet hum of admiration felt like part of a larger moment that was bigger than just one person. It was a moment where recognition, opportunity, and possibility converged in a way that could change everything. The photographer didn't know yet what the future held. But they knew this. Something had shifted. That photograph on the wall was more than just an image. It was a door, opening quietly, inviting them into a world they had only dreamed about. And as they looked back at the image, their own work, so familiar yet so new in this setting, they whispered again. More to themselves this time, maybe this is just the beginning. The rest of the night passed in a blur of faces, conversations, and quiet admiration. People approached the photographer, commenting on the photograph, asking about the story behind it, and sharing their own experiences. Each interaction built a sense of confidence and possibility that the photographer had never felt before. By the time the evening came to an end, they walked out of the gallery with a sense of wonder, their hearts still racing, their mind filled with ideas and plans, and as they stepped back onto the streets, the city lights flickering above, the photographer realized one simple truth. Sometimes, life surprises you in ways you never expect. Sometimes your work, your passion, your quiet efforts can be seen, appreciated, and celebrated in ways you never imagined. And sometimes one photograph, one moment, one invitation can change everything. The photographer could hardly believe what was happening. Standing there, staring at the photograph on the gallery wall, they were still trying to process the moment. It felt like a dream, one that was vivid, exciting, and completely unexpected. And then the man who had approached earlier, the one who seemed calm, confident, and yet genuinely kind, started talking again. "I've always believed that art has a way of speaking to people," he said. "And your photograph, it spoke to me." His voice was calm, but there was a warmth to it that made the photographer feel comfortable, even though they were still trying to find words. "When I first saw it online, I couldn't stop thinking about it. It's rare to see something that captures a feeling so perfectly, something that feels alive even though it's just an image." The photographer nodded slowly, still unsure how to respond. Words felt inadequate. How could they explain the hours of wandering the streets, the patience, the quiet moments spent waiting for just the right expression, just the right light? How could they describe the feeling of pressing the shutter at the exact moment when everything aligned perfectly? There were no words that could truly capture the effort, the intuition, the love that went into each photograph. The man smiled, noticing the photographer's hesitation. "You don't need to explain," he said. "That's the beauty of it. Art doesn't always need explanation. Sometimes it just needs to be seen and felt, and this is one of those moments." He paused for a second, looking at the photograph again, as if seeing it for the 100th time. "I wanted to share it with others. That's why I brought it here. That's why it's on this wall tonight." The photographer's heart swelled. It was one thing to have strangers like a photograph online. It was one thing to receive a few compliments here and there. But this was different. Someone had not only noticed the work, but had valued it so much that they had made it the centerpiece of an entire gallery opening. It was more than recognition, it was validation in the purest sense. You really liked it?" The photographer asked quietly, still trying to wrap their mind around the situation. The man chuckled softly. "Liked it? I loved it. More than that, it stayed with me. I kept thinking about it for days after I first saw it. It reminded me of something I can't quite put into words, something about life, about small moments that matter. And then I thought, why should I keep this feeling to myself?" The photographer could feel the sincerity in his words. There was no exaggeration, no pretense, no hidden agenda. It wasn't about showing off wealth or status. It wasn't about trying to control or manipulate. It was simply about the photograph, the feeling it created, and the desire to share that feeling with others. That simple truth resonated deeply with the photographer, who had often wondered if their work truly mattered in the larger world. "You've inspired me," the man continued. "You've reminded me why I started collecting art in the first place. It's not about money. It's about connection. It's about the way a piece can make someone stop and think, can make someone feel something they didn't expect to feel. And your photograph, it did that for me." The photographer swallowed hard, a mixture of awe, gratitude, and disbelief running through them. They had always dreamed of having their work recognized, of reaching people in a meaningful way, but this was beyond anything they had imagined. It wasn't just recognition. It was a connection between the artist and the viewer, a bridge that suddenly felt very real and very important. For a moment, they both stood in silence, letting the words and feelings settle. The crowd around them continued to move and chatter, but in that small space there was a quiet understanding. The photographer realized something important. This moment wasn't just about the photograph. It was about being seen, being appreciated, and being understood in a way that mattered. Then the man asked a question that caught the photographer by surprise. "Would you like to see more people experience your work? Would you like to share it in a bigger way?" The photographer blinked. I don't know," they admitted. "I mean, I've never thought of it like that. I take photographs. I never imagined anyone outside my little world would really notice them." "That's exactly why this matters," the man said gently. "You've been creating in your own space, in your own way, without thinking about recognition or fame. And that's why it's powerful. But imagine if more people could feel what you felt when you took these pictures. Imagine if your work could inspire, move, or comfort others. That's what I want to help you do." The photographer's mind raced. There was excitement, yes, but also fear. Could they really take this leap? Could they trust this person, this stranger who somehow seemed so genuine with their work, their dreams, their art? What if it didn't work out? What if it all fell apart? The man seemed to sense their hesitation. "I understand," he said softly. "It's a lot to take in. I'm not asking for a decision tonight. Just think about it. Your work deserves to be seen, and I'd like to help make that happen in a way that feels right for you." Something about the calm reassurance in his voice made the photographer breathe a little easier. They realized that this wasn't about pressure or obligation. It was an offer, a gift, an opportunity. And for the first time, they allowed themselves to imagine a world where their work could truly reach beyond the small corners of their life. As the evening continued, the photographer wandered the gallery again, this time with a new perspective. They watched people stop and look at the photograph, noticing the subtle details, the emotion, the story behind it. They overheard conversations where strangers speculated about the moment captured, about the feelings it evoked, about the life behind the lens. And with every glance, every comment, the photographer felt a growing sense of connection. A sense that what they had created wasn't just a picture, but a bridge to other people's hearts. At one point, a few guests approached, curious about the artist. The photographer explained the story behind the photograph, the rainy afternoon, the waiting, the sudden burst of light and expression that had made the moment perfect. People nodded, smiled, even shared their own experiences. It was a simple exchange, but it felt profound. The photographer realized that art had a way of connecting people, of creating a silent conversation that words often couldn't capture. By the end of the night, the photographer felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. It had been overwhelming, yes, but in the best way. The invitation, the photograph on the wall, the kind words of the man, they all combined into a single, unforgettable experience. And though they didn't know what the future would hold, they felt a spark of possibility, a sense that something important had begun. Walking out of the gallery into the cool night air, the city lights twinkling above, the photographer reflected on the evening. It had started as a simple invitation, a curiosity that pulled them out of their routine, and it had led to a moment that felt like a turning point. They realized that sometimes recognition comes when you least expect it. Sometimes someone else's appreciation can change your perspective, open doors, and inspire new dreams. And most importantly, they realized that art was more than just a personal pursuit. It was a gift, a way to touch other people's lives, to make them feel, to make them pause, and to make them connect. And that thought, that simple yet profound idea, stayed with the photographer as they walked home, the city buzzing around them, full of possibilities waiting to be discovered. After the gallery night, the photographer couldn't stop thinking about what had happened. The image on the wall, the millionaire's words, and the attention the photograph had received all kept playing over and over in their mind. It felt like the start of something big, something they had never imagined could happen. But at the same time, there was fear, a quiet voice inside whispering doubts. Could this really lead somewhere meaningful, or was it just a brief moment of luck that would fade away? A few days later, the photographer received a call. The voice on the other end was calm, friendly, and confident. "I hope you've had some time to think," the millionaire said. "I wanted to see if you might be interested in discussing a more serious opportunity, something that could help more people see and feel your work." The photographer paused, taking a deep breath. I'm listening," they said carefully. Unsure of what exactly to expect, the millionaire explained patiently. "I have a few galleries and exhibitions coming up, and I would like to feature more of your work. Not just the one photograph, but a small collection. I can help with printing, framing, and organizing everything so that it reaches a wider audience. I can also introduce you to other artists, curators, and collectors who could support your career. Basically, I want to help you take your photography to the next level, if you're willing." The photographer's heart raced. They had never thought of themselves as someone who could be part of a larger exhibition. Most of the time, they had simply taken pictures for the joy of capturing moments, without thinking about money, recognition, or careers. And now, here was someone offering guidance, support, and resources that they could never have imagined. I don't know what to say," the photographer admitted, voice barely above a whisper. "I've never done anything like this before. I've always just taken pictures on the streets, posted them online, and hoped someone might notice. I don't know if I'm ready for something so big." The millionaire laughed softly, a warm, reassuring sound. "You don't have to be ready yet. That's why I'm here to help you figure it out. You've already shown that you have talent and vision. Now, it's just a matter of sharing it in a way that feels comfortable for you. You won't be alone in this." The photographer thought about it for a long time. They pictured their small apartment, the quiet mornings with coffee and camera in hand, the hours spent wandering the streets waiting for the perfect shot. They thought about all the people who had smiled for a fleeting second, the moments that had disappeared too quickly to remember. Could those moments, captured in photographs, really become something bigger? Could they really touch other people in the way the millionaire suggested? After a pause, they finally nodded. Okay, I'm willing to try. The millionaire's voice brightened. That's all I needed to hear. We'll start slowly. I'll help you select the pieces for the exhibition, and we'll work on the presentation together. The important thing is that you feel comfortable with every step. We'll take it one step at a time. Over the next few weeks, the photographer's life began to change in ways they had never expected. The first step was selecting photographs. The millionaire came to the apartment one afternoon, carrying a large portfolio of ideas and materials. They sat together, going through hundreds of images, discussing which ones told the strongest stories, which ones could connect with people emotionally, and which ones reflected the photographer's unique perspective. The process was both thrilling and exhausting. Each photograph brought back memories, stories, and feelings. Some were simple moments, a child playing in the rain, a couple sharing a quiet laugh, an old man feeding pigeons in the park. Others were more complex, capturing the raw emotion of life, a street musician lost in his music, a tired worker pausing for a moment of reflection, a stranger showing an unexpected act of kindness as they worked. The photographer began to realize something important. This wasn't just about creating a collection for the exhibition. It was about understanding their own work on a deeper level. Each photograph held a story, and sharing it with the world meant finding the meaning behind every frame. The millionaire encouraged this exploration, asking questions, listening attentively, and offering insights without imposing ideas. The photographer felt seen, not just for their art, but for their perspective, their thought process, and their voice as an artist. The next step was preparation for the exhibition. The millionaire introduced the photographer to professional printers, framers, and gallery staff who could help turn the images into polished, ready-to-display works. The photographer had never thought much about presentation before, but they quickly learned that how a photograph was displayed could make a huge difference in how it was perceived. The way the light hit the frame, the spacing on the wall, even the height at which it was hung, all of it mattered. It was an eye-opening experience. The photographer realized that talent alone was not always enough. Presentation, context, and the way people experienced the work were equally important. And yet, with the millionaire's guidance, it all felt manageable. Every step was carefully explained, and every decision was made with the photographer's comfort in mind. During this time, the photographer also began meeting other artists, curators, and collectors. At first, they felt nervous and out of place, unsure of how to talk to people who seemed so accomplished and confident. But the millionaire's support helped. They introduced the photographer, explained the work, and encouraged open conversations. Gradually, the photographer discovered that these people were not intimidating at all. They were simply fellow human beings, curious, passionate, and willing to share their experiences. One meeting in particular stood out. A well-known curator looked at the photographer's collection and said something that changed the way they thought about their work. "These photographs are not just images," the curator said. "They are stories, moments of life that many people overlook. You have the ability to make people stop and feel, and that is rare. Don't underestimate your impact." Hearing these words was overwhelming. The photographer had always thought of their work as small, personal, and private. To hear that it could move others, inspire thought, and even change perspectives was almost unbelievable. Yet, as they looked around the gallery space, seeing other people react to the photographs, they realized it was true. Art, even simple moments captured on camera, had the power to connect, to inspire, and to touch lives. The exhibition day finally arrived. The photographer felt a mix of excitement and nerves. Their work was displayed alongside other talented artists, carefully arranged to tell a story that flowed naturally through the gallery. The photograph that had first drawn the millionaire's attention was placed at the center, a quiet anchor for the entire collection. As visitors began to arrive, the photographer watched nervously, heart pounding. Would people notice the details? Would they understand the stories behind the images? Would anyone feel the same connection that the millionaire had described? To the photographer's relief, the response was immediate and powerful. People stopped, stared, and lingered. They smiled, laughed quietly, whispered to each other, and occasionally wiped away a tear. The photographs were no longer just images on a wall, they had become windows into human experiences. Moments that spoke directly to the viewers' hearts throughout the day. Visitors approached the photographer with questions, comments, and stories of their own. Each interaction reinforced the sense that the work mattered. Every smile, every thoughtful glance, every shared memory reminded the photographer why they had taken those photographs in the first place. They weren't just capturing images, they were capturing life, humanity, and emotion. And now those moments were reaching people in ways they had never imagined. By the end of the exhibition, the photographer realized that something profound had happened. The experience had changed them, not just as an artist, but as a person. They had discovered that their work could have meaning beyond their own perspective, that it could connect with others, inspire thought, and create shared experiences. The opportunity had been scary, yes, but it had also been transformative. Walking home that night, carrying a quiet sense of accomplishment and wonder, the photographer thought back to the gallery invitation, to the photograph on the wall, to the millionaire who had noticed their work. Without that moment, none of this would have been possible. It was a reminder that sometimes recognition comes unexpectedly, and that sometimes the courage to say yes to an opportunity can change everything. And as they looked up at the city lights, feeling the cool night air, the photographer realized something else too. This was not the end, it was only the beginning. There were more moments to capture, more stories to tell, and more people to reach. And with the guidance and support they had received, they finally felt ready to take the next step. After the first exhibition, the photographer felt a mix of pride, excitement, and nervous anticipation. The experience had opened doors they never imagined could exist, and yet it also brought a new sense of responsibility. Their work was no longer just for themselves. It had become something that could reach people, move them, and even inspire them. The weight of that realization was both thrilling and humbling. The millionaire continued to support the photographer, introducing them to more opportunities, helping them refine their vision, and guiding them in navigating the art world. With each meeting, the photographer learned something new, not just about photography, but about life, creativity, and human connection. It was an education that could not be found in books or online tutorials. It was practical, personal, and deeply inspiring. One morning, the millionaire invited the photographer to a small studio in the city. "I want to show you something," they said. Inside, the studio was filled with photographs, artwork, and projects from other artists the millionaire had supported over the years. Some were large, dramatic pieces. Others were subtle, quiet images that carried deep emotion. Each piece had a story, a journey, and an audience who had connected with it in their own way. The photographer wandered through the studio, feeling a mixture of awe and curiosity. Each of these artists started somewhere, the millionaire explained. Most of them were unknown, unsure, and hesitant. But they took the chance, shared their work, and committed to their vision. That's what matters most: courage and persistence. The words struck a chord. The photographer thought about their own journey, the quiet mornings, the endless walks through the streets, the moments of doubt and uncertainty. They realized that their path was not so different from the artists in the studio. Talent alone was not enough. It took courage to step into the world, to share one's work, and to trust that it could make a difference. Over the next few weeks, the photographer began working on a second exhibition. This time, they were more confident, more deliberate, and more connected to their work. They chose images that were not only visually striking, but also emotionally compelling. They thought about the stories behind each photograph and how people might relate to them. Every frame was considered carefully: the lighting, the composition, the moment captured. It was a labor of love, and the photographer felt a deep sense of purpose with every decision. The preparation for the exhibition also brought new challenges. The photographer had to navigate logistics, deadlines, and coordination with printers, framers, and gallery staff. At first, these details seemed overwhelming, but the millionaire offered guidance and support at every step. "It's all part of the process," they said. "Learning how to manage these things doesn't take away from your creativity. It enhances it. It lets your work reach more people in the way you intend." During this time, the photographer also noticed a shift in themselves. They had become more confident, not in an arrogant way, but in a quiet, grounded sense. They realized that their work had value and that sharing it with the world could inspire, comfort, and connect others. They were no longer creating solely for themselves. They were creating for people who might never meet them but could feel the moments they captured through their lens. One afternoon, while reviewing photographs for the exhibition, the photographer received a message from someone who had attended the first show. The message was simple but heartfelt. "Your photographs reminded me to slow down and notice life again. Thank you for sharing your work." The photographer stared at the message, feeling an unexpected wave of emotion. This was the impact they had always hoped for. The proof that their work could touch lives in ways they had never imagined. The day of the second exhibition arrived, and the photographer felt a mix of nerves and excitement. This time, they were not just observing the reactions, they were fully part of the experience. Talking to visitors, sharing stories behind the photographs, and seeing how each image resonated differently with each person. Children laughed at playful images, adults paused at reflective moments, and some visitors even shed quiet tears at images that captured raw emotion. The photographer realized that art was not just about what you created, it was about what you allowed others to feel, to remember, and to experience throughout the exhibition. The photographer noticed familiar faces from the first show, along with new visitors. Collectors, curators, and even fellow photographers approached, sharing insights, feedback, and encouragement. Each interaction reinforced the sense that the work mattered. Every thoughtful comment, every smile, every moment of reflection added meaning to the effort they had poured into the images. By the end of the evening, the photographer felt a profound sense of fulfillment. The exhibition had been a success, but more importantly, it had been a deeply personal and transformative experience. They realized that the journey was not just about recognition or career advancement, it was about connecting with others, sharing moments of humanity and finding purpose in the work they loved. In the days that followed, the photographer noticed that their perspective on life had shifted. They walked the streets with a new awareness, seeing potential photographs everywhere, not just for the sake of the image, but for the story, the emotion, and the human connection it could convey. They approached each day with curiosity, empathy, and a sense of purpose. The city itself felt alive in a way it hadn't before. Full of moments waiting to be noticed and shared, the millionaire continued to provide guidance, but their role evolved. They became less of a mentor giving instructions and more of a collaborator, someone who believed in the photographer's vision and offered support when needed. They encouraged exploration, risk-taking, and experimentation. "Your work is about authenticity," they said one day. "Never lose sight of that. People respond to honesty, to moments that are real. That is what makes your photography powerful." This advice resonated deeply. The photographer reflected on their own approach to photography. They realized that it was not technical perfection that mattered most, but the ability to capture truth, emotion, and life in a way that others could relate to. Each photograph was a window into a moment, a chance to share what it felt like to be present in that instant. And now, with the support and encouragement they had received, those moments could reach far beyond their own experience. As the months passed, the photographer's confidence and skill continued to grow. They experimented with new techniques, explored different neighborhoods, and sought out unusual perspectives. They challenged themselves to see beyond the obvious, to notice subtleties that others might miss, and to capture the hidden beauty in everyday life. The process was both demanding and rewarding, but the photographer embraced it fully, knowing that each effort brought them closer to their vision. One evening, as the photographer was reviewing images from a recent shoot, they paused to reflect on the journey so far. It had started with a simple invitation, a photograph displayed in a gallery. and the attention of a single person who believed in their work. From there, everything had changed. The exhibitions, the connections, the opportunities, they had all grown from that one moment of recognition. And yet, the photographer knew that the true reward was not the recognition itself, but the ability to touch people's lives through their art. The photographer understood. Now that growth was not just about skill or success. It was about impact, empathy, and connection. Their work had become a bridge, linking their own experiences with those of strangers who could feel, reflect, and even be inspired by the images. Every photograph carried a story, a moment, a lesson, or an emotion. And every time someone responded to the work, the photographer felt a quiet, profound sense of purpose. By the end of this period, the photographer had grown in ways that went far beyond their art. They had gained confidence, clarity, and a sense of direction. They had learned the value of persistence, patience, and courage. And most importantly, they had discovered the power of sharing their work with the world, not for fame or wealth, but for the ability to connect, inspire, and move others. And as they prepared for future exhibitions and projects, the photographer carried one thought with them above all else, that art was not just about the creator, but about the people who experienced it. Every photograph had the potential to change a life, even in a small way, and every moment captured was a gift that could reach far beyond the frame. That realization became the guiding principle for everything they did, shaping not only their work but the way they lived, observed, and interacted with the world. After months of exhibitions, meetings, and creative exploration, the photographer realized that something remarkable had happened. Their life had changed in ways they had never imagined, all starting with a single photograph and one person noticing it. The journey had been full of surprises, challenges, and lessons, but now, standing at this point, they understood that the impact of their work went far beyond recognition or success. The photographer had begun to notice the subtle ways their art touched people's lives. Messages and letters arrived from strangers, often simple but meaningful. One person wrote that the photographs reminded them to appreciate the little things in life, to slow down and notice moments that often passed unnoticed. Another shared that seeing the images had helped them through a difficult time, bringing a sense of peace and hope. These small gestures of connection made the photographer realize the true value of their work. It was not just about creating beauty, but about reaching hearts, inspiring thought, and making people feel seen and understood. Encouraged by these responses, the photographer began to think about how they could give back, how they could help others in the creative community find the same encouragement and opportunity that had changed their own life. They remembered the excitement, the fear, and the disbelief they felt when first seeing their photograph on that gallery wall. The feeling, the moment of recognition, was powerful, and they wanted to share it with others. With the Millionaire's support, the photographer started reaching out to young, emerging artists who had talent but lacked confidence or resources. They offered advice, shared experiences, and even helped organize small exhibitions to give these artists a platform. Sometimes it was a single piece of advice or encouragement that made the difference. Sometimes it was simply showing someone that someone else believed in them. The photographer had come to understand that inspiration and opportunity could be life-changing, and they wanted to be the same spark for others. One day, the photographer received a message from a young painter whose work they had noticed online. The painter expressed doubt about whether their art mattered or if anyone would ever notice. The photographer responded with a message full of encouragement, sharing their own journey, how one photograph had unexpectedly reached someone, how that recognition had opened doors, and how the courage to say yes to opportunity had changed everything. A few months later, the painter's work was displayed in a small exhibition, and the joy in their message was palpable. The photographer realized that passing on encouragement and opportunity was as rewarding as creating their own art. As the photographer continued to grow and share, they also began to reflect on their own journey. They thought about the quiet mornings in their small apartment, the long walks through the streets, and the countless moments captured through their camera lens. Every struggle, every doubt, every small success had led to this moment. They realized that the journey itself, with all its highs and lows, was just as valuable as the exhibitions, the recognition, or the applause. The photographer also became aware of how their perspective on life had changed. They had learned to notice beauty in the simplest moments: a stranger's smile, sunlight falling through a window, children playing in the park. These moments were no longer just subjects for photography, they were reminders of the value of paying attention, of living fully in the present, and of appreciating the small, fleeting details that make life meaningful. One afternoon, while walking through the city, the photographer noticed a small, quiet street that they had never explored before. The light was perfect, soft, and golden, falling on the cobblestones in a way that made the scene almost magical. People passed by, unaware of the beauty around them, each absorbed in their own world. The photographer lifted their camera and captured the moment, thinking about how small things often went unnoticed, yet could hold so much significance. It was a simple image, but one that reminded them of why they had started photographing life in the first place. The photographer's reputation continued to grow, not because they sought fame or attention, but because their work resonated with people. Collectors and curators admired the authenticity and emotion in the photographs, and invitations to exhibitions and collaborations arrived regularly. Yet the photographer remained humble, grounded, and focused on the purpose that had guided them from the beginning: connecting with others, sharing stories, and inspiring reflection during this time. The photographer also reflected on the role of the millionaire in their journey. Without that initial recognition and support, none of this would have been possible. The millionaire had not just provided opportunity, they had seen potential, believed in the work, and offered guidance without pressure or expectation. That generosity and vision became a model for the photographer, shaping how they approached their own interactions with young artists and aspiring photographers. One evening, after another successful exhibition, the photographer sat alone in their apartment, reviewing the images from the day. The city lights twinkled outside the window, and a quiet sense of fulfillment settled over them. They thought about how far they had come from quiet, uncertain mornings with a camera to exhibitions, recognition, and the ability to inspire others. And yet they also realized that the journey was ongoing. There were still streets to explore, stories to capture, and lives to touch. The photographer also recognized that success was not measured solely by recognition or material rewards, but by the ripple effects of their work. Every person who paused to look at a photograph, every visitor who felt emotion or remembered a moment from their own life, every young artist who gained confidence through encouragement, these were the true measures of impact. The photographer understood that art was not just a personal pursuit. It was a shared experience, a way to connect humanity through moments frozen in time. Reflecting further, the photographer thought about the question that had echoed in their mind when they first saw their work on the gallery wall: why is my picture here? At that moment, it had been a question of disbelief, confusion, and amazement. Now, looking back, they understood the answer more deeply. It wasn't just about their photograph, it was about connection, recognition, and opportunity. It was about seeing potential in something simple and giving it the chance to grow. And most importantly, it was about how a single act of recognition could change a life in ways unimaginable. The photographer also realized that the journey had changed them personally. They had become more empathetic, patient, and aware of the impact their actions could have on others. They had learned to listen, to support, and to encourage, not just in photography, but in life. The process of sharing their work, mentoring others, and creating meaningful experiences had nurtured their own growth in ways that went beyond artistic skill. Over time, the photographer began planning workshops, small exhibitions, and community projects to engage more people. These events were not about profit or recognition, they were about connection. They invited young photographers, students, and aspiring artists to explore their creativity, share their work, and experience the power of recognition and encouragement. The photographer remembered the feeling of seeing their own photograph on that gallery wall and wanted others to experience that same spark of possibility. In these workshops, the photographer shared not just technical skills, but the lessons learned through their journey, the importance of patience, observation, and empathy, the value of courage and persistence, and the impact of sharing work authentically. They encouraged participants to notice life, capture emotions, and tell stories through their art, and as they watched others grow, gain confidence, and share their own moments, the photographer felt a sense of fulfillment and purpose that went far beyond personal success. The journey also brought new friendships and collaborations. Fellow artists, inspired by the photographer's approach and dedication, joined in projects, exhibitions, and creative explorations. Together, they built a small community centered on support, authenticity, and shared passion. The photographer realized that this sense of community, of collaboration and mutual encouragement, was one of the greatest gifts of their journey. As the years passed, the photographer continued to grow, experiment, and inspire. Each new photograph, each new project, and each new exhibition was a step forward, a new opportunity to connect with others, and a reminder of the journey that had begun with a single photograph and one person noticing it. And through it all, the photographer never forgot the lessons learned, the power of recognition, the importance of courage, and the value of sharing one's work with the world. Looking back, the photographer knew that the journey had changed everything. It had shaped not only their career, but also their perspective, their relationships, and their sense of purpose. The photograph that first hung on the gallery wall had been more than an image. It had been a catalyst, a spark that ignited a journey of growth, connection, and impact. And as the photographer continued to walk the streets, camera in hand, noticing the small moments, the quiet stories, and the fleeting emotions, they understood one simple truth: the power of art lies not just in creation, but in connection. Every photograph taken, every story captured, and every moment shared had the potential